My name is Clayton Ramsey. I was 38 that fall, based out of Kerrville. And if you had asked me then whether I believed in monsters, I would have told you I believed in tread depth, brake temperature, axle weight, and whether a man kept his word when he said he would show up at daylight. I drove long haul for a freight outfit that ran me across West Texas and up through New Mexico, then back down through hill country, and between runs I worked my Uncle Wade's place because Det did not care if I was tired, and I had never been built for sitting still. I had jackknifed once on black ice near Rayton Pass and climbed out, with my hands steady enough to set flares in sleet, so panic was never my first language. Checklists were. Wade's spread sat outside town where the paved road gave up and became caliche, then dust, then two ruts along Cedar and Mesquite. The bunkhouse I stayed in had one narrow bed, a window unit that rattled like a coffee can full of bolts, and a table I used for route maps, fuel receipts, and unpaid bills. After my divorce, it had been the kind of place I could afford without pretending. My boy stayed with his mom in town during the school week, and we had him weekends when dispatch did not pull me north. I kept his drawing taped to the bunkhouse fridge with a magnet shaped like a steer head. It was mostly stick trucks and crooked suns. It was enough to keep me from acting reckless. Most mornings started before dawn, phone vibrating on the table, dispatch asking how many legal hours I had left, where I could pick up, whether I could move a load of feed pallets by noon. I would drink coffee that tasted like burnt pennies, walk a loop around the truck with a flashlight, tap tires, check lines, look for seepage under the engine, then roll out while the sky still looked bruised. On ranch days, the rhythm shifted but stayed strict. Feedstock, repair what had failed, replace what had worn out, and finish with one last walk from the porch to the barn under the sodium bulb mounted over Wade's back door. That light painted everything amber and flat, like the world had been dipped in old varnish. It left deep shadows where the mesquite started. Wade was 62, all tendon and weather, with a habit of folding his cap brim while he listened. He spoke like a man who had spent years conserving words for when they mattered. Luis worked the neighboring lease and crossed over most afternoons to help with wire and trough pumps when one of us got behind. He was younger than me by maybe 8 years, broad-shouldered, quick with a grin, and fearless in the specific way men are fearless when they have never seen anything that does not fit a known category. The three of us were not talkers in the sentimental sense. We traded practical information, fuel prices, rain chance, which gate chain had gone missing, whether coyotes were pushing calves too hard that week. One Thursday near the end of September, Wade and I were resetting a sagging corner post by the north fence. He straightened up, rolled his shoulder, and asked if I was sleeping any better. I told him better than when the divorce papers were fresh, worse than I should for a man who drove 80,000 pounds through mountain curves. He gave a dry half laugh and said, "You keep outrunning your own head, Clay. One of these days it is going to catch up." Luis came up the line carrying staples and said, "If his head catches him, tell it to help with this wire." We all laughed like men do when there is no real joke, just fatigue and sun and a little relief at not being alone in it. By the second week of October, my routine at Wade's had become automatic enough that I could have done it blind. Feed at 6, water lines by 7, trailer brake check after lunch, barn sweep before dusk, final perimeter loop at full dark. The healers usually ranged ahead of me, noses down, then circled back when I whistled. The horses settled near the trough after evening feed, and the insect noise came up from the grass like static, steady and ordinary. You could stand on the porch and map the property with your ears alone. Frogs by the stock tank, crickets in the ditch, distant highway hum when the wind shifted east. The first thing that changed was the dogs. I came off the porch one evening carrying a feed scoop and called both healers by name. They trotted halfway down the steps, then stopped hard, like they had hit a glass wall, ears flat, tails tucked so tight they looked clipped, low whining they could not quite suppress. I clicked my tongue and called again, sharper. Nothing. They backed up until their hips pressed the bottom step and stared past me toward the open strip between the porch and the barn. I walked out alone, annoyed more than concerned, because dogs had moods and storms were due. Halfway to the barn door, I caught a smell that did not belong there, wet and rank, like old fur left in a plastic tote. It came and went with the breeze. I finished chores and told myself a stray had crossed through. The next night, same thing. Dogs refusing open ground. Not hesitant, not distracted, refusing. They stayed tight to the porch posts and tracked that same dark lane with quick eye movements. The horses were off pattern too. Instead of drifting toward water, they bunched along the far fence with their heads high and ears pinned toward the mesquite draw, then broke and regrouped every few minutes, as if something kept shifting position, just out of sight. I stood by the trough and watched them work themselves up and kept running possible causes. Snake in the grass, loose dogs, hogs moving along the tree line. I had seen feral hogs spook horses before. It fit better than anything else. On the third night, the sound dropped out. It was not gradual, it was a clean cut. Crickets, frogs, the little wing buzz around the porch bulb, all of it gone in a shape I could actually trace. If I stood near Wade's back steps, I could still hear insects to my left and right. Straight ahead between porch and barn, maybe 30 yards across, there was a dead pocket where nothing chirped or moved. Step 2 paces sideways, and the noise returned. Step back into that lane, and it vanished. I stayed there longer than I should have, moving a boot heel over dirt, testing where the edge started and ended. The silence had boundaries. I remember that detail because it made me angry first, then uneasy. Natural things blur. This did not. I told myself I was tired. I told myself lack of sleep and too much coffee could make ordinary patterns feel loaded. Then I walked the fence and found 3 posts bowed outward from the inside of the pasture. Wire stretched but not cut. Staples half pulled where force had hit low and hard. No tire marks. No clean impact scar from equipment. The ground showed churned dirt and partial prints that sank deep enough to suggest weight, but the edges were smeared where dry soil broke off. Not hoof clear, not boot clear. I crouched with my flashlight and measured spacing with my hand like I would compare lug patterns. Whatever had pushed there had leverage, not just momentum. At supper, Wade noticed I was quiet and asked what broke. I told him about the dogs, the horses, the fence. He chewed, swallowed, and said, "Could be hogs. Could be a rogue bull leaning wrong. Could be you are seeing ghosts because you have been running hard for 3 weeks." He said it without meanness, just plain. Luis came in late, and I showed him photos on my phone. He squinted, snorted, and said, Those dogs of yours are spoiled, man. One armadillo farts and they think the world is ending. It got a laugh out of Wade. I managed one too. For about 10 seconds, I nearly bought my own explanation again. I did another night loop anyway because habit beats mood. The sodium light hummed over the porch and through that same amber cone across caliche and weeds. The barn sat at the edge of it, white tin turning dull gold, doors shut. Beyond that, black cedar line. The heelers paced in tight circles near my knees and kept glancing toward the dark gap. When I stepped forward, both dogs dropped low and gave a sound I had never heard from either of them. Not a bark, not a growl, something thin and pleading. They would follow me along fence lines, through brush, around cattle, but they would not cross that center strip. I stood there with feed dust on my jeans and sweat drying under my shirt, and felt my body decide before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My breathing went shallow. I scanned like I was checking mirrors in heavy traffic. Left, right, left. Near, far, near. Waiting for motion. Nothing showed. The smell rolled through again, stronger this time, wet fur and sour meat, carried on a cool draft from the draw. Then it disappeared so clean it felt switched off. I slept in 2-hour scraps with my phone on loud, boots beside the bed, and woke each time I heard the dogs shuffle under the bunkhouse window. At dawn, I walked back out and rechecked the bowed fence posts in full light, hoping daylight would make me feel foolish. It did not. The wire was still stressed outward. The dirt was still torn. A mesquite branch near the corner had fresh bark stripped in a downward rake. Parallel grooves deeper than thorn scratches. Too high for hog shoulder rub and too deliberate for weather break. I placed my palm against the trunk to compare height. The top gouge sat close to my collarbone. That evening I changed my process. I moved an old work light onto the barn eave and checked its sensor. I topped off the truck in case I needed quick movement. I laid my lever action by the bunkhouse door, not because I expected to use it, but because leaving it in the closet suddenly seemed like pretending. I hated that feeling most. Pretending. If there was a normal answer, I wanted it. If there was not, I needed to know fast. When Wade headed in, he paused at the porch rail and watched the dogs pressed against the steps. He did not joke this time. "You smell that?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He frowned toward the draw and said, "Keep your loops short tonight. If stock are still jumpy at first light, we call the warden and say predator pressure. No speeches, no drama, paper trail." I said, "Works for me." Luis lifted a hand from his truck as he left and shouted, "Do not let your haunted porch light keep you up, Clay." His tone was light, but he rolled his windows up before he reached the gate. I stayed outside longer than I meant to, listening to a property that no longer sounded like itself, watching a stretch of open ground that had become, for reasons I could not measure yet, the only place on that ranch I did not trust. I did not trust it, so I stopped pretending I could clear my head by standing still and started working the problem. I went to Wade's shop, pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer by the vise, and wrote down what I had instead of what I feared. Dogs refusing center lane, horses bunching east fence, silence pocket between porch and barn, odor like wet hide and spoiled meat, fence pressure from inside pasture, bark rakes above hog height. Then I added what I did not have: clear prints, hair sample, camera image, witness besides me. Seeing it listed like freight discrepancies calmed me for about 5 minutes. By full dark, I had moved a folding chair, to the porch corner with the widest angle to the barn doors. I set a thermos of coffee beside it, checked that the porch bulb was tight in the socket, and clipped a handheld spotlight to the rail. The healers never ranged more than 10 feet from my boots. They kept shifting position without settling, as if they needed to stay near me and near the door at the same time. The first hour gave me nothing except my own pulse and that hum from the sodium light. Then the insects collapsed again, same shape, same crisp boundary. I walked it this time with a tape measure in my hand and marked start and end points with landscaping flags from Wade's shed. 32 feet wide at the porch edge, narrowing to 27 feet near the barn threshold, almost like a corridor. I had no use for that data, but measuring it made me feel less cornered. At 10:43 that night, the new barn motion light snapped on hard enough to throw white glare across the tin. No body crossed the beam. No branch moved in front of the sensor. The light burned for 15 seconds and shut off. 30 seconds later, it triggered again. Same empty wash of light, same dead center lane, same dogs pressed flat to the porch boards. On the third activation, one of the horses kicked the corral panel and the sound rang out like a hammer strike. Every horse in that lot shifted as a unit toward the far fence. I swept the spotlight across the barn wall, the trough, the posts, the ground, slow and methodical. Nothing. But the smell came in stronger than before, and it did not drift past this time. It sat there, layered in the dark like someone had opened a container and left it. Around midnight, Wade came out in thermal long johns and a denim jacket, cap pulled low, one hand around a mug. He stood beside me without speaking for a while, then said, "You ever seen the light trip like that with no coyote under it?" I said, "No." He sniffed once, looked toward the draw, and muttered, "I do not like that." We watched another 2 cycles in silence. Then, from somewhere behind the barn came a sound like weight shifting against sheet metal. Not a kick, not a scrape, a controlled push, then release. Tin flexed and popped back. Wade set his mug down on the rail and said, low and even, "We are not walking around back tonight, morning only." I did not argue. I wanted to. Pride does that. But I had started to understand that this thing, whatever it was choosing the dark side of every angle. We locked Wade's back door, and I took first watch from the porch until 2. Nothing crossed open ground. Nothing showed in beam or moonlight. Twice I heard the same pressure sound from behind the barn, and once a dry click of wire under strain from the north fence line, like a gate chain being tested by hand. I kept the rifle on my lap and forced myself to breathe through my nose so I would not miss small sounds under my own movements. At dawn, we moved as a pair. Behind the barn, the ground told a story I could not file under normal ranch trouble. The dirt near the wall was disturbed in a shallow arc, heel depth impressions, but no clean toe pattern, as if weight had come down and rolled off at odd angles. The lower tin panel had 2 fresh dents, shoulder width apart, both inward, both too high for hog impact. Along the corner post, 4 parallel gouges scored the wood and stripped paint in strips. I put my hand under the lowest groove. It sat above my belt line. The highest was near my sternum. Wade crouched and touched one mark with his thumb, then stood and looked at me with that tight jaw he got when bills were due and rain was not coming. Dog did not do this. Hog did not do this. He said it like he was admitting fault in his own fence line. Then he added, "Could be some fool with tools." I pointed at the dirt. Then he walks on stilts and smells like roadkill. Wade did not smile. Call Luis in when he gets here. Luis rolled up by 7 with wire reels in his truck bed and that usual morning energy he wore like armor. He took one look at our faces and set his coffee on the bumper. I showed him the barn dents, the gouges, the flagged silence lane, the bowed fence posts. He tried to keep his tone light and mostly failed. Maybe your mystery beast is a gym rat hog, man. Been doing squats? He laughed once by himself, then stopped when the dogs would not leave the porch shadow even in daylight. He walked the north fence with me, boots crunching caliche, and we found fresh pressure on a different section. Top wire stretched, bottom strand dug into dirt, post leaning outward. No cut marks, no snagged cloth. 20 yards down, in a soft patch near the ditch, we got the best print yet, and still it was wrong. Deep rear pad impression, 2 forward points blurred, spacing too long for coyote stride and too narrow for a person in work boots. It looked like evidence and like nothing I knew. By the 3rd night after I first flagged the silence, my discomfort had stopped feeling like nerves and started feeling like instruction. Do not cross that lane alone. Do not stand in open light with black ground behind you. Keep keys on you. Know where hard cover is. My body had shifted into that trucker state I used in whiteout weather, where every small input mattered, and mistakes came expensive. That night, right after 11:30, something hit the barn from the rear, hard enough to rattle both doors in their tracks. The impact sounded heavy but not clumsy. One strike, then stillness. The horses blew through their noses and stomped. The healers vanished under the porch and would not come out even when I lay down and reached for them. I called Wade through the back door, and he came with a 12 gauge and a flashlight, face set. We stood at the edge of the porch light, not crossing the center lane, listening. There was breathing out there. Not loud, not theatrical. A slow draw and release from a chest with volume behind it, just beyond what the porch light reached. I could not see shape, only darkness layered on darkness. But I could place that breath by distance, maybe 25 yards between us and the barn. It moved once to the left, and the smell rolled over us so strong my eyes watered. Wade whispered, "Inside now." We backed in, locked up, and watched through the kitchen window until first gray light touched the fence tops. When we stepped out at sunrise, the dirt in that lane carried a clean message. Tracks, 3 of them, set in a staggered line where no animal had crossed there in weeks. Each one was long, narrow at the heel, broader at the front, with claw points sunk deep enough to hold edges after wind, predatory and heavy. And they were pointed at the porch. I spent the rest of that morning trying to prove to myself that what was near us had a normal name. I started with the county game office because that was the least dramatic option. The receptionist transferred me twice before I got a warden named Pritchard, voice flat from too many calls about varmints and trespass. I gave him facts only, no speculation, and he listened long enough to ask 3 practical questions. Any livestock down? Any bite marks on carcasses? Any clear photo? I said no on all 3, then described print length and the height of gouges on the barn post. He paused and said, "Could be an escaped exotic. Folks keep things they should not keep. Could be a large feral dog mix. Secure feed and avoid solo night checks until we can swing by." I asked when that would be. He said maybe Friday. It was Tuesday. Next call was Deputy Salinas at the county office, mostly to put a timestamp on record. He knew Wade by name, said he could drive out late afternoon if calls stayed quiet, then added the line every rural deputy has earned the right to use. If it is out there and it acts aggressive, you protect yourself first and call me second. Not dismissal, not belief either, just procedure. Luis heard me making calls and leaned against the shop door frame with his arms crossed. "You really doing this like a report?" he asked. I said, "If this turns into damage, insurance will ask when we notified. So yeah, report." He nodded, then glanced toward the barn and said quieter, "I slept with my truck lights on last night. Do not tell my wife." That was the nearest he came to admitting he was worried. We spent the afternoon building a net of ordinary explanations and watching each one tear. Bear was first. I pulled up range maps on my phone and called a cousin who worked feed deliveries west of us. Black bears showed up farther north sometimes, usually passing through and avoiding houses. Could a bear bend wire and hit tin? Yes. Could it leave the kind of stride we were seeing in dry soil and move quietly enough to trigger lights without body silhouette? Maybe. But the gouge spacing and the height kept bothering me. Also, the dogs knew bear scent from old bait station stories and had never reacted like this. Stray dog pack came next. Dogs could harass stock, pull wire, spook horses, and vanish before you got a light on them. But dogs did not make those postmarks at chest height unless they were climbing. And nothing in our area climbed smooth barn siding and dropped back with that much controlled force. Person in costume or prank crew got a full 30 minutes of serious attention because ridiculous answers are still answers if facts support them. I checked both entrance gates for tire tracks and found only ours and a feed truck's old pattern from Monday. No boot prints around the north fence where pressure happened. No beer cans, no wrappers, no cut chain. If somebody was doing this as a joke, he was moving through thorn scrub at night without leaving trace and risking a rifle round for entertainment. By late afternoon, Deputy Salinas did come by, parked near the porch, and walked the lane with us. He was polite, focused, and hard to rattle. He photographed the tracks and the gouges with a scale card, took Wade's statement, then mine, then looked at the flagged silence corridor like it offended his training. "I can log it as unidentified large animal presence with property damage," he said. "That gets patrol to swing this road at night for a bit. I cannot promise response time if it is just movement and no active attack." He crouched by one track, measured with his glove, and frowned. "This is not clean enough for cast. Wind got it, but whatever said it has weight. Stay paired after dark." He looked straight at me. "No hero loops." When he drove off, Luis exhaled and said, "There, official. Now maybe it gets bored and leaves." Wade answered, "Predators do not get bored. They get bolder if you teach them there's no cost." That shut us all up. I spent that evening hardening systems the way I would prep a truck before a mountain run. 2 trail cameras went up, one angled at the barn doors, one covering the lane from a mesquite stump. Fresh batteries. Timestamps synced. I ran extension cable to power a second floodlight over the barn corner and tested trigger delay. I parked my truck nose out toward the gate with half a tank minimum and keys on a lanyard by the door. I put spare flashlight batteries in a coffee can on the porch table and set my phone to loud for camera alerts. For an hour after dark, things were almost ordinary. Insects at the edges, horses calmer, dogs still uneasy but visible. Then, just after 9 o'clock, my phone pinged with a motion alert from camera 1. I opened the image and got static bands across half the frame and empty dirt in the rest. 15 minutes later, camera 2 pinged. Same interference, different angle. The floodlight had tripped, but the recorded frame showed no body and beam. At 10:12, a third alert came through with one frozen image that made my throat tighten. Left side of frame near the barn corner, there was a smear of dark texture crossing out of view. It could have been fur, could have been shadow, but the visible portion sat too high off the ground for hogback and too thick for coyote shoulder. No eyes, no face, just a blurred mass where nothing should have been. I brought the phone to Wade and Luis in the kitchen. Luis squinted, then shook his head. Could be a moth on lens. Could be your camera choking. Wade took longer. Could be, he said, and if it is not, we just learned it knows where your light falls. Around midnight, while we were still arguing about sensor lag and false positives, the barn lights snapped on and stayed on. No cycling. Steady white flood. Through the back window, I saw the horses bunched tight against the far rail again, all heads pointed at one place. The heelers made that thin pleading sound and flattened to the floor by the pantry door. Then came a single deep grunt from outside, low and close, followed by the dry twang of fence wire pulled and released. Predator near. No more debate. Predator near. No more debate. Wade killed the kitchen light so the window would stop reflecting us back at ourselves, and the three of us stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark glass, like men waiting on hail we could hear but not see. The barn flood still burned hard, bleaching the tin wall and throwing long shadows from the corral rails, but the center lane between porch and doors looked darker than it should have under that much light, like the brightness stopped at its edges and refused to carry through. Luis whispered first. We go out there now. We either push it off or we teach it. This place is easy. I do not like either option. Wade kept his eyes outside. Option 3 is stay breathing till daylight. I said, if it is testing distance, we do not give it a close read on us for free. My voice sounded steady enough. My hands were not. I can take porch watch. You both stay in here where doors lock. Luis turned toward me like he was going to argue, then heard another faint wire twang from the north side and changed his mind. You call, I come. No hero stuff. I took the lever action from where I'd leaned it against the mudroom wall, checked the tube by feel, and stepped onto the porch with the spotlight in my left hand. The heelers were already gone under the boards, nails scraping wood, bodies pressed so far back, I could only see the whites of their eyes when they shifted. I sat in the folding chair near the rail, boots planted, rifle across my lap, and held still until my breathing settled into something I could work with. The floodlight stayed on another minute, then clicked off. The property dropped into amber and moon gray and deep black. For the next hour, I watched nothing happen with the full concentration of a man who knows that is when mistakes are born. Insects worked the edges of the pasture but left the center strip untouched. Horses gathered tight and drifted apart, then bunched again. Twice I smelled wet fur and rot, heavy and damp, then lost it on a wind shift. At 1:08, my phone buzzed with a trail cam alert and delivered a frame of static tearing diagonally across the lane, white snow and black bands where dirt and weeds should have been. At 1:26, another alert. Same distortion. No body, no clear shape. Just noise exactly where I needed clarity. By 2 o'clock, my neck was stiff from holding one posture, and my mind kept trying to close loops it could not close. I told myself it could be a sensor fault and 3 tired men primed to misread shadows. I told myself the smell could be a dead hog in brush, and the wire noise could be temperature strain. I had spent years rejecting superstition because freight did not move on folklore, and part of me clung to that habit like a handhold on slick pavement. Then the insects cut out again in that same narrow corridor, and the silence landed so abruptly it felt physical, like stepping into insulated air. At 2:17, 2 points of amber green lit up between the porch and barn. They did not flare all at once the way a deer catches a beam. They appeared one after the other, left then right, each brightening as if they had opened. I froze, with the spotlight still angled low at the ground, because I didn't trust my own eyes yet. The reflections hung there at a height just under the barn eave line from my angle, maybe 7 feet off grade, maybe more depending on slope. They remained perfectly level with each other. I raised the spotlight in a slow arc and stopped short of them. The eyes blinked independently, one close, then open, then the other, a staggered movement that felt deliberate in a way no startled animal ever had. Deer bob and pivot, cattle flare and turn broadside. Coyotes flicker in and out because their heads never stop moving. These stayed fixed on me while the rest of whatever owned them dissolved into black. I heard Wade open the back door behind me and step to my left. He kept his voice barely above breath. "You seeing that too?" "Yeah," I said. "Do not come farther." Luis came to the threshold but did not cross it. "What is that, Clay?" I did not answer because every answer I had required a body shape, and there was no body shape yet. Just those eyes suspended in a patch of dark that seemed to absorb the porch glow and refuse detail. I tried to triangulate using known points the way I would estimate trailer swing in a tight dock. The lower barn latch was 4 feet, the corral top rail 5. The eyes above both by a clear margin, even accounting for distance and parallax. Not an owl perched on the door track. Not a cat in mesquite. Wrong placement, wrong spacing, wrong steadiness. The smell hit next, strong enough to make my throat tighten. Wet pelt, spoiled meat, metallic tang underneath. It came from dead ahead with no drift this time. The healers began whining under the porch in short, desperate pulses, and then went silent, like they had exhausted even that. Wade lifted his 12 gauge just enough to index where he was looking, not aiming, just ready. "Could be 2 animals lined up," he said, but the sentence lacked conviction even as he said it. "Then they are standing inside each other," I muttered. The eyes shifted 6 inches to the right, then stopped. No visible footfall, no sway. Just a small relocation and stillness again, like a person testing angle without committing distance. I felt cold along my forearms, despite the warm night. My mind kept searching for familiar categories and failing on each pass, and the failure itself became its own panic. When your tools do not fit the job, you start to understand how thin comfort really is. I thumbed the spotlight to full and drove the beam straight at the eyes. The light washed the lane, bleached weeds, struck barn tin, but the shape between us remained mostly void, detail stripped out by contrast and angle. The eyes flared brighter for half a second, then narrowed to slits. I heard a low exhale, not loud, almost controlled, and a soft scrape-like weight resetting on dirt. Then both points dropped out at once, not turning away, just gone. Luis swore from the doorway. Wade said, "Inside now." I backed toward the door without taking my gaze off the lane, rifle up, spotlight jittering because my hand had started to shake. Nothing rushed. Nothing revealed itself. The center strip held empty under amber light and moon haze. We locked the door, killed interior lamps, and watched through the kitchen window until sunrise silvered the cedar tops. No one slept. At first light, we went out in a line. Wade on my right, Luis on my left. All three of us armed with something blunt, or loud enough to buy seconds. The lane showed compressed patches in the dust where weight had come down, but edges were smeared and hard to cast. Near the barn threshold, we found one partial track clear enough to read front pressure and claw punctures, deeper than any coyote print I had ever seen and longer than my hand from wrist to fingertip. Not perfect evidence. Enough to end jokes. Luis stared at it for a long moment and said quietly, "I did not sleep with my lights on because I was being dramatic." Wade rubbed his jaw and looked toward the draw. "No solo work tonight. We finish what must be done before dark and then we stay tight." We spent that day moving with urgency and no wasted motion. Wade called the county office again and left an update that included visual contact at night, eye shine at unusual height, and repeated approach behavior. I sent the static frames and blurred fur shot to Deputy Salinas and Warden Pritchard, then saved copies to 2 drives, because I had started to expect electronics to fail when I needed them. Luis helped me run another extension line and mount a second flood over the barn corner, this one aimed lower to reduce blind spots. We staged 2 air horns by separate exits, parked trucks nose out, and stacked scrap lumber and feed sacks to close gaps under the porch where the dogs had been hiding. By late afternoon, the sky had gone thin and milky, high cloud moving east, and the ranch looked ordinary in that insulting way places do after a bad night. Sun on tin, flies at the trough, dust devils along the road. If a stranger had driven up then, he would have seen 3 worn-out men over-preparing for nothing. I caught myself almost wishing for that verdict. Embarrassment would have been a gift. Wade handed me a fresh mug and leaned against the porch post. "You still think bear?" I watched the lane and shook my head. "I think whatever it is learns. That bothers me more than the size." He nodded once. Then we stay predictable to each other and unpredictable to it. Luis came up from the barn carrying cable ties in one hand and a pry bar in the other. "My wife says I am done helping out here after tonight," he said with a strained grin. I told her I agree. Never thought I would be relieved to lose side work. It was the only humor any of us managed, and it died fast. Dark came slower that evening, clouds thinning until moonlight leaked through in pale strips. We held the same positions by plan. Wade at the kitchen window with the 12 gauge. Luis inside the mudroom with a clear line to the back door. Me on the porch rail with rifle and spotlight. The dogs would not leave the house threshold even to drink, so we set bowls by the pantry and left them there. At 10:41, the north flood tripped, then the south, then both shut off, together as if someone had cut power. I heard the relay click in the breaker box. Then both lights came back on. 30 seconds of bright wash told me nothing except that the center lane was empty, and the horses were already pressed to the far fence, all heads angled toward the mesquite draw. At 11:03, the wind died. No insect noise in the corridor, no leaf movement. just that a layered stillness I had started to recognize as arrival. The first sign was vertical absence on the barn wall. I had been watching the white tin long enough to know every shadow from trough, post, and hanging chain. Then a new shape took up space, where light should have been. A tall, narrow block at first, then widening as it moved one step into overlap between porch amber and moonwash. I kept the spotlight off because I wanted my eyes adjusted, the outline sharpened by degrees. Head high but thrust forward, shoulders riding above what any known canid should carry, torso tapering to hips set high, legs jointed wrong for a man and wrong for a wolf, bent back at the hock and loaded like springs. It stood bipedal, hunched, chest angled toward us. For a second, my brain offered desperate alternatives: a man in ghillie, a dead tree limb illusion, two animals crossing in line. Then it shifted weight, and the entire silhouette moved as one integrated body, balanced and controlled. The top of its head cleared the corral rail by a full 2 feet from my perspective, and sat near level with the upper crossbar on the barn door. Broad through the chest, narrow at the waist, forelimbs hanging longer than a person's arms with elbows canted out. "Clay," Wade said from behind glass, voice tight. "Tell me what you have." I swallowed and answered without looking away. Upright shape. Big. Too big. Between porch and barn, 10 yards left of center. Luis was beside him now, staring through the mudroom window. "That is not a bear." "No," Wade said. "It is not." Cloud cover slid off the moon in a thin sheet, and the silver light edged the figure from behind, giving it depth. I saw the neck then, thicker than it should have been, set too upright for a quadruped but not human in proportion. The head turned slightly and I caught a profile. Elongated muzzle line, not short-snouted, ears set high with one side ragged at the tip. No details of teeth yet, no full face, just contour. Still enough to erase every last ordinary explanation I had been guarding. The shape leaned forward and took 2 silent steps. Digitigrade. Heel lifted high, weight carried on forefoot, each placement precise. It stopped again at the edge of the porch light cone, as if testing where brightness started. Those amber-green eyes opened inside the silhouette and fixed on me with a focus that felt clinical. I realized then it was not wandering or passing through. It was evaluating distance, exits, and reaction. My mouth had gone dry. Sweat ran down my spine despite the night breeze returning in faint, uneven breaths. The rifle stock felt slick against my palm. I kept trying to map it onto something cataloged and safe because naming gives control, but the list had run out. Predator, yes. Animal, maybe. Natural in any way that mattered to my life before that week? No. The thing angled its shoulders toward the bunkhouse side and held there, still as fence stone. Wade opened the door 2 inches and said, low and firm, "Inside, Clay. Now, we hold from hard points." I took 1 step back and the silhouette flowed sideways without noise, matching movement with movement, not rushing, shadowing. My body reacted before thought finished. I raised the spotlight and clicked it on. The beam struck chest fur and blew out detail, then slid off. As my hand shook, the figure recoiled half a step into darker ground but did not flee. I backed to the threshold, eyes locked on that outline, and crossed inside. Wade shut and barred the door. Through the window, we watched it remain in the lane for what felt like an hour and was probably under 20 minutes. A black mass between our porch light and barn flood, occasionally shifting weight, never fully turning away. Each minute it held the ground made the ranch feel smaller, as if our known world had been reduced to a few lit rooms and a rifle leaning on a counter. When it finally moved, it did not run. It eased backward, shoulders first, then hips, then vanished into the cedar brake without a sound we could track. None of us spoke for a long time. The house creaked. The dogs trembled against the pantry door. My pulse thudded in my ears and refused to settle. I stood there with my hand on the rifle and tried to convince myself that fatigue had stretched shadows into a shape my mind invented, that 3 men under stress could share the same bad read, that tomorrow morning would hand us some plain, humiliating answer and put this back into the world I trusted. I worked at that lie until dawn started to gray the window, and even then I did not believe a word of it. When it finally eased backward out of the overlap light and disappeared into the cedar brake, none of us treated that as an ending. I kept the rifle up and the spotlight fixed on the last place I had seen movement while Wade counted out loud from the doorway, slow and steady like he was timing a fuse. Luis stayed on the inside threshold with his radio in one hand and the door brace in the other. We held that posture through 2 full sweeps of the lane, then 2 more, listening for brush pop, hoof strike, anything that gave direction. Nothing came back except that wet, feral musk and the dead silence pocket between porch and barn. I worked at that lie until the first real bird call cut across the yard and proved the night had ended whether I believed it or not. Wade unbarred the door, and we stepped out in a line again, each of us moving slow, watching the lane and the barn corners and the cedar brake where it had disappeared. The dirt between porch and barn held fresh depressions, deeper than the ones from the night before, and this time the pattern ran closer to the house than I liked. 3 clear placements in the softer patch near the water line showed a long rear pad and forward punctures where claws had bitten in during a weight shift. I crouched with my tape and got a rough length that landed just under 14 inches on the cleanest mark. The stride spacing said upright for at least part of the movement, then dropped into longer intervals where it had loped. Wade stayed standing, 12-gauge angled down, jaw set hard. "I want County out here today," he said. "Not tomorrow. Today." Luis pointed his pry bar toward the porch post and swallowed. "Clay, look at that." At first I thought he was showing me a scrape in the paint. Then I saw what hung from a splinter just below the rail. A strip of dark material, maybe 5 inches long, matted and coarse at one end, finer toward the tip. Fur, not wire insulation, not cloth thread. I used pliers from my belt pouch to lift it into a freezer bag without touching it. Up close, it had 2 colors, almost black on top with gray-brown undercoat, and it stank like wet dog left in a closed trailer for days. We found one more on the low wire by the north corner, snagged where the fence had bowed. Same texture, same smell, evidence with no normal label. Inside, Wade got Deputy Salinas on speaker, while I texted photos to the number he gave me yesterday. He listened, asked us to bag anything physical, and said he could swing out after lunch with collection envelopes. Warden Pritchard answered on the second call, voice clipped, and told us he had 2 livestock complaints and 1 vehicle strike-up county but would try late afternoon. "Do not contaminate track edges," he said, "and do not push into brush after it." I nearly laughed at that last part because none of us needed the reminder. By noon we had done what had to be done in tight loops near the buildings and left the rest. Horses got water and feed, close to the house side. The healers finally came out long enough to drink, then glued themselves to Wade's boots. We kept doors open only long enough to pass through and shut them behind us every time. That level of caution would have sounded paranoid to me a week earlier. By that day, it felt like basic competence. Deputy Salinas arrived a little after 1, photographed the fur strands beside a scale card, and wrote everything down without commentary. He took our bagged samples, cast one partial print that had held shape and shade, then stood by the porch rail looking toward the draw. "You 3 are doing this right," he said. "Paper trail, evidence handling, no chasing, keep that going." He paused, then added quietly, "I will log patrol emphasis for this road overnight again. If you hear impact on structure or direct approach, call immediately." It was practical language, but the way he kept scanning while he spoke told me he believed we were dealing with something beyond routine coyotes and thieves. Pritchard never made it that afternoon. We got a call near 5 saying he had been diverted to a cattle kill 30 miles south and would contact us next day. Wade wrote the time and details on the legal pad and set it by the phone. Every contact became a record now. An hour after sunset, cloud cover rolled thin across the moon and gave us a shifting light that made depth hard to read. We had adjusted positions after the previous night. Wade stayed inside with the shotgun and the handheld radio Luis dug out of his truck toolbox. Luis held the mudroom with the second radio and a clear line to the back door. I took porch watch again, but this time I wore hearing protection around my neck for the rifle report and kept my truck keys clipped to my belt, not hanging by the door. The first 2 hours were tense and empty. Flood cycled twice with no visible trigger. The insects held at the edges and left the same dead lane in the middle. I marked wind direction in my head by the cedar tips and the way the odor came in pulses. At 11:47, the smell hit hard from the barn side and stayed. Not a passing ribbon this time. A settled presence. Then I heard a soft drag against metal from behind the barn, followed by 2 measured taps on tin, spaced like knocks. Not random contact. Deliberate. I keyed the radio. "Wade, Luis, I have movement rear of barn. Sounded like contact on wall. Stay put." Luis answered first, voice tight. "Copy. No visual from mudroom." Wade came in a beat later. "Do not advance." I kept the spotlight off and let my eyes work in the mixed light. A shadow peeled away from the barn corner, not fast, just easing out in sections, shoulder first, then head. It stayed half in darkness, using the overlap where the porch, sodium, and barn flood washed each other out. I saw fur before shape this time. Long, rough guard hairs hanging in clumped strips over the upper arm and shoulder, darker along the back, lighter and patchy where the chest turned. It turned its head toward me and the muzzle came clear for a second when the porch light swayed in the wind. Long snout, narrow bridge widening at the nose, lips drawn back enough to expose pale, uneven teeth that caught the amber light like chipped bone. Saliva hung from the lower jaw in thin strings and snapped when it shifted. The left ear had a notch torn out near the tip, just like I'd guessed from silhouette, and the skin around it looked old scarred. My body locked so hard, my calves cramped. I had hauled 80,000 pounds through crosswind on mountain grades and felt less exposed than I did standing on that porch with a railing at my back. The thing angled forward and I saw its forelimb come up, not pawing, not swiping, just lifting as it placed weight. The end of that limb was wrong in a way that made my stomach drop. Not hoof, not a dog paw. It had long digits that flexed separately, tipped with curved claws that caught and released dirt with a sound like someone raking gravel by hand. Hand-like. Predatory. Built for grasp as much as traction. I told myself to breathe through my nose and not lose track of distance. 26 yards from my post to barn threshold, give or take. It stood about 5 yards in from the barn corner. If it covered that lane in a burst, I had seconds. The chest moved in controlled cycles, slow draws and holds, like it was pacing its own breathing to stay quiet. That detail scared me more than teeth. I had seen animals pant, blow, snort, bark. This was restraint. This was decision. "Clayton," Wade said over radio, the first time he had used my full name in years, "talk to me." I kept my voice low, and even because if I let the fear into it, I was not sure I could pull it back. Partial visual confirmed. Big male canid structure but upright, snout, torn ear, heavy fur, forelimbs end in digits with claws. It is watching me and staying in edge light. Silence for half a second, then Wade. "Inside if it closes." "It has not committed," I said. Luis came over the radio with a whisper that cracked. "I can see shoulder from here, dear God." The creature took one step left, then paused. I shifted right to keep angle, and it mirrored me exactly. Same distance, same pace. That was when the primal part of my brain finally overrode every rational loop. It was not just near us, it was reading us. It was matching position to keep line on me. Not on the house, not on stock. I clicked the spotlight on full and hit its upper torso. Light washed over matted fur and a thick neck that stood too upright for any wolf. It flinched, turned its head away from the beam, then looked back around the glare with one eye half-lidded, as if evaluating rather than panicking. The eye reflected amber green again, but now I could see the shape around it, deep set under a brow ridge, focused and tracking. For 2 full seconds we held each other like that, me with light and rifle, it half exposed and unblinking. Then it dropped from that stiff, upright stance into a lower hunch and moved 3 fast steps sideways with startling smoothness, almost a glide, and vanished behind the water tank, where the flood did not reach. I stood, spotlight sweeping, heart slamming so hard my vision pulsed. Nothing reappeared, no charge, no retreat sound I could pin, just odor, silence, and the horses hammering the far fence with their hooves. "Inside now," Wade said. I backed to the door and went in without arguing. Wade barred it and we took windows, with lights off, scanning every angle around the porch and bunkhouse. 20 minutes passed, maybe more. The lane stayed empty. The cedar line stayed black and unreadable. At 1:02, Luis hissed from the mudroom. "Movement by bunkhouse window." I shifted to his position and looked through the side pane. At first I saw only reflected interior shadows. Then a shape darker than the wall moved along the outside of my bunkhouse, close enough to brush siding. It paused at my window, head level above the unit, and stayed there. Not crashing. Listening. My bunkhouse sat 15 yards from Wade's back door. I knew every board, every rattle in that little window unit, every place the skirting sagged. Seeing that mass at my own wall felt personal in a way the lane did not. This was no longer territorial pressure around stock. It had moved from open ground to my sleeping space. I keyed the radio to Wade, though he stood 3 feet away, habit taking over. "It is at my window." Wade answered anyway. "Hold, we do not split." The shape drifted out of view, and 10 seconds later something tapped the porch post outside. Once, then twice, same spacing as the barn tin earlier. A signal or maybe coincidence. I stopped pretending coincidence mattered. We held until first light. When dawn finally came, we stepped out and checked in sequence: porch, bunkhouse, truck, then fence line. The porch post had 2 fresh gouges chest high on me, shallow but clean. My bunkhouse window screen was slit in 3 places from outside in, and the sill carried a smear of mud and coarse hair. Tracks circled the bunkhouse twice, close to the wall, then cut to the porch and back to the lane. Inside the bunkhouse, it got worse. My duffel was still under the bed, boots where I left them, lockbox untouched, but the fridge door stood open 2 inches. The magnet with my son's drawing was gone from the front. I found the drawing outside in the dirt by the steps, damp and folded once down the middle, not wind-blown across the yard, not dropped randomly. It lay exactly where I would see it when I walked out. I stared at that paper until my vision blurred. A stick-figure truck, crooked sun, his uneven block letters trying to spell Dad. No damage except dirt, and 1 thin tear at the corner where the magnet had ripped away. Louise stood in the doorway behind me and said quietly, "Could it have fallen off by itself?" I held up the fridge and showed him the scratch marks around the magnet spot, 4 narrow arcs in the paint. Not like that. Wade came in, looked once, and his face changed in a way I'd never seen. Not fear exactly, recognition. "It sampled your space," he said. "It learned scent. It knows which room is yours." I wanted to reject that. I wanted a mechanical answer, raccoon paws, loose seal, anything. But the pattern outside had already told the truth. Circles around my walls, paws at my window, item removed from the exact place a person would value most. Whether it understood meaning or just attention trigger did not matter. The result was the same. I was not an observer anymore. I was selected. By mid-morning, we moved everything essential from the bunkhouse into Wade's house and locked the bunkhouse deadbolt from outside, even though a lock suddenly felt symbolic. I set the drawing flat between 2 clean towels on Wade's kitchen table so it could dry without tearing, then photographed it beside the deputy case number card. Evidence and personal at once. That sentence alone told me how far my thinking had shifted. I called Salinas and gave him a new update: repeated nighttime approaches, direct movement to occupied structure, property intrusion, personal item displacement. He did not laugh, did not soften language, did not question whether I was tired. "Treat this as active predatory behavior," he said. "I'm en route with another unit by evening. Do not stay in detached buildings." After that call, I stood at the sink with both hands on the counter and felt the truth settle into place with cold clarity. The thing out there was not drifting through by chance. It had watched our routines, tested our lights, mapped our responses, and pushed closer each night. It had stood in the lane to hold ground, then shifted to my wall when we denied it distance. It had taken something from my room and left it where I would find it. Predators do not need hate to hunt. They need pattern, opportunity, and a target they can isolate. I was done trying to understand what it was. The only question left was whether we could break its pattern before it broke us. I turned from the sink and started treating the place like a load shift at highway speed. No drama, just corrections before the trailer took the truck with it. Wade pulled out another legal pad and split the page into tasks. Luis checked every window latch in the house, then checked them again. I moved ammunition, flashlights, and radios into one kitchen cabinet so no one would have to search in the dark. We brought both healers inside and blocked the dog door with a feed sack and a shovel handle. Then I called for help, until help turned into hold music, dispatch transfers, and polite delays. Deputy Salinas answered once, told me he still planned to come with another unit before dark, and asked if the animal had made direct contact with any person. I said no, not yet. But it had approached my window and entered my bunkhouse. He told me to remain in the main house and keep external lights on manual, not sensor. 20 minutes later, County Dispatch called back and said both units had been rerouted to a wreck with injuries on the highway. They would try again later. Warden Pritchard never picked up. His voicemail was full. I called a neighboring rancher 2 miles east, a man named Tully who owed Wade favors, and asked if he could sit a watch from his side fence with thermal optics. He listened to me for maybe 15 seconds before saying his wife had already heard enough and he was not leaving his own kids asleep in the house to chase unknown predators across county lines. He was not rude. He was scared. I could hear it in the way he rushed the goodbye. That was when the scale of it settled in. We were 3 men in one house at the end of a dead road with one deputy promising to try. By late afternoon, the ranch looked normal again in broad light, and normal had started to feel like mockery. The horses fed near the trough for a while, then all 4 lifted their heads at once and tracked something along the cedar edge we could not see. The healers stood braced at the back door and growled low at empty yard. Around 4, Luis found another set of prints in the dust behind Wade's water tank. Not as deep as the night tracks, but clear enough to show the same long rear pad and forward claw punctures. Daylight movement, not just night pressure. Luis wiped sweat off his face with the back of his wrist and said, "I am going to say this straight. If we leave right now, all 3 in one truck, we can be on pavement in 10 minutes. Wade stared toward the gate, then toward the livestock pens, then back to the house. If it shadows the truck and we get blocked at the cattle guard, we are in open ground with no cover. If we stay, we have hard walls and fields of fire." Luis looked at me. "You decide. It is your call as target." I hated that he was right about that last word. I took a breath and worked it like a route decision in bad weather. Risk against risk. No perfect lane. We stay till first light unless county gets here before full dark. If we move with escort, not blind. Nobody argued after that. It was not confidence. It was the least bad option. I spent the next hour setting the last-ditch barrier I had been thinking about since the booed fence posts first showed up. I tore old feed sacks into strips, twisted them into a rope, soaked them in diesel from a jerry can, and laid that line in a shallow S-curve across the open approach to the barn threshold, far enough from structures to limit spread, close enough to force a break in any straight charge lane. I staked it with bent rebar and left 2 ignition points, one near the porch end and one by a cinder block behind the truck. Crude, risky, but better than waiting with no interrupt. When I came back in, Wade watched me wash diesel off my hands and said, "You really think Flame will check it?" "I think surprise might buy seconds," I said. "Seconds are what we have." At dusk, Deputy Salinas called again. Wind noise blew through his mic. He sounded frustrated, breathless, moving. "Still tied up. I can maybe clear after midnight. State unit might swing your road once around 11. No promises on stop time." I said, "Copy," and hung up before my temper could climb into my voice. I had spent years believing systems worked if you followed procedure. That night procedure gave me maybe. Dark came in layers, blue to gray to black, and by the time the porch bulb looked orange instead of yellow, every one of us was in position. Wade held the kitchen window with the 12-gauge. Luis stayed at the mudroom corner with a bolt action and radio. I took the porch with my lever action truck keys clipped to my belt, spotlight on the rail, and a road flare tucked into my back pocket for the diesel line. At 9:38, the insects cut out in that corridor between porch and barn. No fade, just absence. The smell arrived right after, wet fur and sour decay, pushed low on a breeze from the draw. I clicked the radio. "It is here," Luis answered, whisper thin. "Copy." For 30 minutes, nothing moved in open view. Then the barn flood tripped on and off twice. On the third trip, it stayed on, and a shadow slid across the white tin from right to left at a height that made my scalp tighten. Not a coyote crossing low. Not horse movement. Vertical mass. The thing tested us first. Tap on barn tin. Pause. Tap again. Same measured spacing as before. Then a scrape along the outside of Wade's porch rail, close enough that I could hear wood fibers lift under pressure. It was circling blind spots, checking reactions. I told myself not to chase sound and kept my barrel on the lane. My breathing shortened anyway. My forearms tingled. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. At 10:11, the state unit drove our road without stopping, headlights flashing through cedar trunks like a passing train. The cruiser slowed at the gate, then rolled on. I could have screamed. Instead, I keyed the radio and said, "No help, eyes up." A minute later, the porch bulb flickered twice and steadied. The barn flood hummed. I thumbed the truck remote and unlocked doors without starting engine. One click sounded loud as a snapped branch. Then it stepped out. Not partial, not silhouette. Full body into overlapping light from porch sodium, barn flood, and my truck headlights. When I hit remote start, and the lamps flared. 7.5 feet if it was an inch. Maybe more when it straightened. Digitigrade legs bent backward with thick tendon lines visible under matted fur, hips high, torso forward canted. Shoulders were massive, wide as a lineman in pads, tapering to a narrow waist and a deep chest that moved in controlled, measured breaths. Fur ran shaggy and dark over back and arms. Strip matted in places like old water and mud had dried there, with lighter undercoat showing in torn patches around ribs and flank. Its neck was thick and upright in a way that refused comparison to any normal wolf anatomy, supporting a long-headed muzzle lined with pale teeth that showed even with the jaw mostly closed. The torn left ear was real, not trick light, not shadow. The edge looked healed rough. Its eyes were amber with a green flare under direct beam, set deep and forward, and they did not wander. I watched them, track in sequence, my rifle muzzle, my right hand near the flare pocket, the truck door, then back to my face. Assessment. Calculation. Its forelimbs hung long, elbows canted out, ending in hand-like structures, with elongated digits tipped by curved claws, maybe 3 inches long, dark at the base and lighter at the points. When it flexed them, the joints articulated separately, gripping and releasing dirt like a climber testing holds. Saliva threaded from its lower jaw and snapped when it turned its head. I could hear its breathing now over the porch hum, deep and steady with a low vibration on each exhale that sat right at the edge of hearing and went straight into my chest, like engine resonance. For one clean second, the world narrowed to measurements. Distance from me to truck fender, 6 steps. Distance from creature to bunkhouse corner, 15 yards. Diesel line between us and barn, armed but dark. Wade and Luis behind glass with limited angle. If it rushed straight, I had one shot before contact. Wade's voice came through the radio, controlled but thin. Clayton, fall back to truck, hard cover, do it now. I moved 2 steps right. It mirrored 2 steps left, maintaining intercept angle to the bunkhouse side. Faint behavior, intelligent probing, just like I'd feared. I hit the horn. The truck blasted a long, ugly note that bounced off barn tin and cedar trunks. Headlights on high threw full glare across its face. It flinched, head jerking, lips peeling back, then dropped low and shifted left toward the bunkhouse door lane in a blur of muscle and fur. I fired one warning shot into dirt 3 feet ahead of it. The report cracked the yard open. Dirt kicked up. It checked for half a stride, then committed anyway, launching into an explosive, loping burst that ate distance faster than my eyes liked. Not blind charge, angled charge, trying to cut me off from truck cover. I pivoted behind the front fender, shouldered the rifle, and fired at the shoulder seam as it crossed the headlight beam. The hit landed with a heavy impact sound and a guttural bark snarl that I felt through the stock. It stumbled 1 step, not down, just disrupted, and swung a forelimb in a near pass as it redirected. 1 claw raked across my left forearm through shirt and skin, hot and immediate. Then gone. Not deep enough to disable. Deep enough to wake every nerve I owned. I dropped behind the hood line, grabbed the road flare, struck it against the bumper, and got blessed with ignition first try. Red fire hissed in my hand. I shoved it onto the diesel rag at the near stake, and the line caught in a fast-crawling bloom, flame racing along the soaked twists in both directions until a low wall of orange snapped up between Porch Lane and Barn Approach. Heat hit my face. Smoke rolled low. The creature recoiled hard, weight shifting back, ears flattening, jaw opening wide in a sound that was more rage than pain. It paced 2 rapid steps along the fire edge looking for a break, then tested a leap angle and pulled short when flame surged higher at the center bend. I levered another round, braced on the truck mirror despite my shaking arm, and fired low toward its front quarter. I cannot swear that shot struck clean, but it broke its line again and forced a retreat arc toward the north fence, where the wire already bowed from prior pressure. Move left, Wade yelled through radio, and I obeyed, dragging back toward porch cover while keeping sight picture. The creature gathered itself and vaulted. It cleared the first wire, clipped the top strand with its trailing leg, tore through in a shower of snapping metal, and landed beyond the fence line in scrub with a crash of cedar branches. For 2 seconds, I had a final view in the truck spill light. Hunched, one shoulder lower than the other from the earlier hit, fur darkened along that side, head turning once back toward the house, eyes reflecting amber green like embers in deep glass. Then it drove into the cedar break and was gone. Not faded. Gone. I stayed on the rifle and tracked the tree line while my body started shaking so hard my teeth knocked together. Wade and Luis came out only after I shouted twice that it had crossed the fence and cleared the lane. Luis killed the truck horn, which I had not realized was still blaring in intermittent bursts from where my elbow kept hitting the fob. Wade took one look at my arm, swore under his breath, and shoved me toward the porch sink for pressure and clean water, while he and Luis hit the fire line with extinguishers and a hose to keep it from spreading past the stakes. By the time flames were out, the night had gone strangely quiet again. But this time, the silence felt emptied rather than occupied. We swept the perimeter with lights and found what we needed to prove it had been hit and driven off. Dark droplets in spaced pattern from the truck lane to the broken north fence. Coarse torn fur snagged on the top strand, and a deep gouge where it had launched. I keyed the radio one more time, and my voice sounded like gravel. "County, this is Clayton Ramsey at Wade Ramsey property. Active predator confrontation. Shots fired in defense. Animal wounded and fled north into Cedar. Immediate threat currently off structure. Need response and report." Dispatch acknowledged, gave me a case update number, and said units were finally en route. I leaned on the porch rail with my forearm wrapped in a shop towel, smoke in my lungs, adrenaline crashing hard, and watched the broken fence line until the first distant siren carried over the dark fields. The siren took longer than it should have, and I remember counting each minute by the way my arm throbbed through the towel. When the first unit finally turned in at the gate, I felt my knees go weak so fast I had to sit on the porch step with the rifle still across my lap. Deputy Salinas came up first, another deputy behind him, both lights sweeping fence line and barn corners while they talked in clipped, practiced sentences. They cleared the house, checked the bunkhouse, then pulled me inside under better light and got pressure bandaging on my forearm. It was a deep graze, not a severed muscle, but it burned hot and kept reopening when my hand shook. The smoke hit me harder once the adrenaline dropped. I made it to the water tank, bent over, and threw up until my ribs cramped. Wade sat me in a kitchen chair with a blanket over my shoulders, even though it was not cold. Luis kept pacing from window to window with the radio clipped to his shirt, repeating the same perimeter checks we had already done, like motion could keep him from replaying what he had seen. Salinas took my rifle, logged the rounds fired, photographed the claw tear on my sleeve, and then walked the blood pattern to the broken north fence with the other deputy. They flagged droplets, bagged torn fur from the wire, and marked the launch gouge with orange paint. By the time first light came up over the cedar, the place looked like an accident scene instead of a ranch yard. I gave my statement at Wade's kitchen table with both hands around a mug I never drank from. I kept it factual, same way I would write up a highway incident. Time of first full visual, distance, number of shots, direction of retreat, injury type, property damage. When Salinas asked what kind of animal I believed it was, I answered, "Unidentified large predator, upright movement observed, aggressive approach behavior." I did not say dogman. I knew exactly how that word would land in an official record, and I needed a documented response, more than I needed an argument. Luis gave his statement next, to voice rough and flat, and Wade backed both of us on sequence and position. No one contradicted anything. Warden Pritchard arrived just after 9 that morning, mud on his truck doors, and a face that said he had been awake too long. He walked every flagged point with Salinas, measured the track cast, and knelt at the broken fence where the fur had snagged. He took swabs from the darker droplets on the caliche, sealed the fur samples into numbered envelopes, and asked for all digital files. I handed over the trail camera cards, copied the static frames and blurred fur image from my phone to his department laptop, and gave him the backup drive I had made after the first interference bursts. He checked the metadata and frowned when the worst distortion frames all showed timestamp drift within the same corridor I had flagged. He did not mock it. He also did not offer a clean explanation. We will classify this as unidentified large animal, likely exotic or feral hybrid pending lab, he said. That gets patrol authority and keeps insurance from kicking back your claim. I nodded because he was right about the paperwork, but hearing it still scraped. A line like that sounds neutral until you are the one who watched it track your exits. By the third day after the attack, my arm had been cleaned and closed, at urgent care in town, tetanus updated, smoke irritation treated, and the shaking had settled enough that I could hold a fork without dropping it. The county came back once with a thermal team after dark and found nothing past the cedar break except one old blood smear on a rock shelf that was already drying. A week later, Pritchard called with preliminary lab notes. The blood sample was too degraded for a full species profile. The fur came back as canid-adjacent markers with contamination and no reliable match in their regional panel. Officially inconclusive. Practically filed under threat animals still at large. The case stayed open for patrol notation and then moved to inactive after 30 days, without new incident. The paper trail existed, just like Wade said it had to. I resolved every piece of physical evidence because leaving loose ends started to feel like inviting the same chaos back in. The deputies returned my lever action after processing, and I logged it in my home safe record. My torn shirt sleeve, bandage photos, and the urgent care report went into one binder with the deputy case number card. The fur sample envelope numbers and chain of custody copies went in the same binder. The track cast was released as non-probative and Pritchard offered disposal. I kept it in a sealed tote in Wade's shop because looking at it reminded me why routines had to change. The static camera cards were cloned and one original card failed completely 2 weeks later, unreadable sectors right where the distortion corridor started. I kept both failed and cloned copies anyway. The drawing my son made got cleaned, flattened, and framed behind glass in my apartment after I moved. Crease still visible down the middle, where I had found it in the dirt. The hardest conversation in those first days was not with law enforcement. It was with Wade on his back steps at dusk, both of us watching light leave the pasture while neither of us wanted to start. He had given me that look in the bunkhouse, the one like recognition, and I asked him straight what he had not said. He rubbed his cap brim and answered without looking at me. When I was 19, working my dad's place north of Junction, we had 3 nights where stock would not cross one lane and dogs hid under the porch, same way yours did. I saw eyes once at wrong height and told myself it was stress. Next morning, we had fence blown out from inside and claw marks up a post. My father called it a rogue predator and never spoke on it again. I followed his lead because that is what men did then. He finally met my eyes. I should have told you after the first night. I said, you told me enough to make records and stay armed. That is why we are still here. He nodded once, but the guilt stayed on him for a while. Luis lasted another 11 days on Wade's property. On the 12th, he met me at the feed store lot before sunrise, handed back the spare radio, and said he had transferred to a ranch closer to town with shared night crews and perimeter lighting on all sides. I am not sleeping out there anymore, he said. I am not ashamed of that. I told him he had nothing to be ashamed of. We still talk. Not about sports and dumb jokes like before. Mostly check-ins, road conditions, who is where after dark, whether the dogs are acting normal. 6 weeks after that night, I quit ranch hand work on Wade's place for good. I still helped him in daylight if he needed an extra set of hands for loading or repairs, but no dusk loops, no overnight bunkhouse, no solo checks. I kept truck driving, but I switched to daytime regional routes and took the pay cut that came with refusing overnight county back roads, unless dispatch had no alternative, and logged it in writing. I moved into an apartment inside Fredericksburg city limits where there were streetlights, neighbors, and no open strip of black ground between where I slept and where I had to walk. The move was not symbolic, it was engineered. Steel core entry door, reinforced strike plates with long screws into studs, 2 camera systems on separate power, 1 battery-backed, motion lights on balcony and parking side, trauma kit in the hall closet, duplicate in the truck, legal firearm in quick access safe at home, and locked mount in vehicle, both documented and trained on. I stopped taking dead-end county roads after dusk, unless there was no route option and someone knew my check-in schedule. Control became my way of staying functional. Wade made his own changes. He sold part of the livestock operation, cut herd size to what daylight crews could manage, and hired rotating teams for any late checks so no one stood alone in open ground. He also replaced the old sodium porch bulb with wider flood coverage and removed blind angles near the barn. The north fence section that thing tore through got rebuilt with heavier posts and tighter wire spacing. No dramatic speeches, just adaptations that cost money and sleep and pride. My ex-wife Erin started from skepticism and moved to support when the evidence got concrete. I met her at a diner in Kerrville with the deputy report, urgent care photos and property damage estimates in a folder. She studied everything in silence, including the picture of the gouges on my porch post and the shot of the drawing recovered in dirt. Then she said, "I do not need to agree with every detail to believe you were in danger." That sentence mattered more than she knew. We built new co-parenting rules that afternoon. No rural handoffs after dark, live location on any late route, code word for pickup changes, and paired light rule if our son ever crossed outdoor ground at night at Wade's. He was never put in that environment again, and that line never moved. 2 years have passed since the night it came fully into the light. I have not seen it again. No eyes in the corridor, no taps on tin, no new fence blowout with that same pattern. The case file is still technically inactive, not solved. Pritchard retired last spring, and Salinas transferred districts. But both men left records that did not erase what we reported. Tully, the neighbor who refused to come that night, told Wade months later he heard the truck horn and a sound from the cedar brake he described as a howl pushed through a diesel engine. He still does not come out after dark on that side of his property. I do not blame him. Day to day, I look steady from the outside. I make my runs, pay my bills, show up for my kid, keep appointments. Therapy every other week. Gave me language for the adrenaline spikes and the sleep disruption, and sleep discipline did what pride could not. Same bedtime window. Same. No caffeine late. No doom loops on footage after 10. If I wake to sudden silence, I do not lie there arguing with my own nervous system. I run the checklist. Confirm doors. Check feeds. Breathe in counts. Let my body relearn the present. Some triggers still hit hard and fast. If insect noise cuts out abruptly on a warm night, my shoulders lock before I think. If a wet fur musk catches me near a loading dock after rain, My hands go cold and my vision narrows for a few seconds. I carry that response without pretending it means weakness. It means I survived something my old framework could not hold. I know how this sounds if you have never watched a known landscape stop behaving like itself. I know every label people use when a story doesn't fit a normal box. My life does fit one thing clearly now. I escaped. Wade and Luis escaped. We documented what we could, changed what we had to change, and built routines that keep us alive instead of comfortable. Whatever stood between our porch light and the barn for 20 minutes remains outside any explanation I can accept. But my part in it is finished, and I intend to keep it that way.